All right, this is Unit 6, Lesson 6, Completing the Square. So I'm going to kind of take you guys back to last week when we were talking about checking to see if something was a perfect square trinomial. And so we had something like x squared plus 5x plus, sorry, not 5x. I'm going to redo this. 10x plus 25. Then we'll do x squared minus 10x plus 25. And then we'll do, how about x squared minus 5x plus 25. So in order to check to see if something is a perfect square trinomial, there's two steps. So the first thing that we have to do is we're going to take that middle term, the linear term, this one right here, we're going to divide that by 2. Okay, so if I take 10 and I divide it by 2, I get a positive 5. And then I'm going to square that number. And when I square that number, if I get the same number as this up here, then I know that this one is a perfect square trinomial. So 5 squared is 25, so I know that this one is a perfect square trinomial. Same thing for the second one down here. I'm going to divide this one by 2. I get negative 5. And when we square negative 5, we still get positive 25. So this one is a perfect square trinomial. With the last one, if I take this and I divide it by 2, I get 2.5. And if I square 2.5, I do not get 25. So even though 5 is the square root of 25, it's not a perfect square trinomial because if I take the half of 5 and square it, I don't get 25. So this one is not a perfect square trinomial. So in order to fill in this box right here, oh look, you can see we already did it over here. The number that we would need to fill in this box back here is going to be half of 10, which is 5, squared, which is 25. Okay, same thing here. What would we need to put in the box in order for this expression to be a perfect square trinomial? Pause it really quick, come back and check and see how you did. So again, we're going to divide this by 2. Which is negative 8. Remember, you got to take negative 16 and divide it by 2. We get negative 8. We're going to square negative 8, and that answer is going to go up here. So this is 64. So I want you to notice a couple of things. Number one, this sign here is always going to be a positive because what happens when we square any number? It always ends up being positive because you're taking a negative times a negative, which is a positive, and you're taking a positive times a positive, which is a positive. Okay? So for the next one, we have x squared plus 40x plus something. We would have x plus this cut in half divided by 2 would be 20, and then we square this and we would get 400. So really quick, the other thing I want you guys to look at is, if I go jump back, whoops, that's not the one I wanted. There we go. If I wanted to rewrite this, we know that this is 25, as a perfect square binomial, what would I have to put inside here? So I have to take the x because x squared is x squared. And then I'm looking for something that's going to give me a 10 and a 25. So all I have to do is take this number here and divide it by 2, which is positive 5. So this would be the same thing as x plus 5 squared. Okay, we know that this one was plus 64. So to write this as a perfect square binomial, we would have x, we would take this, cut it in half, and that would be negative 8 and squared. For the last one that we did, we know that this is going to be 400. So in order to get our binomial squared, we would have x we're going to take this number, divide it by 2, and that answer is going to go down here. So positive 40 divided by 2 is positive 20. So this is kind of like our focus for the last few days. And all we're going to do today is we're going to take it just one step farther. Okay? So this one is a little bit tricky because 5 is not divisible by 2. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible. It just means we're going to have a decimal. So same thing, we're going to take this, we're going to divide it by 2, which is 2.5. When I square that number, that answer is going to go up here. I'm just going to take that same number, and that's going to be what goes in my binomial squared. So this is equivalent to this. So to get this one, we square it. To get this one, we just take the number. So today what we're going to be working on is we're going to be working on completing the square to find the center and the radius of a circle. So completing the square is what we did on all these last few problems here. So when we figure out what goes here, you've completed the square. When we figure out what goes here, you've completed the square. So that's all that means. And in order to be able to find the center and the radius of a circle, we need it to be in this form. So remember, we've got this form x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to the radius squared. Now, a couple of things I want to point out. Number one, these two will give you the center of your circle, but you have to switch the signs. Okay? This is the part where most people get confused. The radius is just the number that is being squared. Okay, so if we write it as 3 squared, the radius is 3, not 3 squared. Okay, so it's just the number without the squared sign on it. Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to get to some examples like that. So first thing, we've got Elena, and she has this equation of a circle. So this is actually an equation of a circle. And the first thing that she did is she went from this would be like the original problem, and she changed this into something that looks like this. So there's a couple of things that she's done. Number one, she took that 105 and she subtracted it from both sides. Okay? She got that constant over onto the other side. Okay? The other thing that she did, and I'm going to highlight this, is she took the x's and she put those next to each other, and then she took the y's and she put them next to each other. Okay? So basically she didn't have to add or subtract anything on this side because everything is staying on this side of the equation. She's just moving things around. It's like moving your bedroom furniture around. Okay? So the next thing that Elena did is she ended up with these boxes in her equation. And she ended up with 4 of them. She's got 2 on this side. She has 2 on this side. So we're going to think about why that is. Now, if you look at what we did earlier today, just this part right here, okay? This is exactly what we did in the beginning of class. All we were doing was making this, we were completing the square, making this a perfect square trinomial, okay? So that's what she's doing here. And the same thing with this part right here. Okay, this is just the y part of it. So we have the x's that we have to complete the square for, we have the y's that we have to complete the square for. And the reason that we have these 2 squares over here is because the rule with equations is whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do the exact same thing to the other side of the equation. So if I add something here and here, I have to add those exact same 2 things here and here on the other side. All right, so the next step that Elena took is she filled in these pieces right here. And so we want to know how she got these numbers here. Okay? We initially had this, and she took those squares and she put numbers in them. Okay? So in order to get this 9 here, she took that -6, she divided it by 2, which is -3, and then she squared the -3, and that's how she got the 9. Same thing with this. She took the -20, she divided it by 2, which is -10, she squared that, and she got 100. And again, I just want to point out, the reason that we have a 9 here and we have a 9 here is because whatever I add to one side of the equation, I also have to add to the other side of the equation. And the same thing with this 100 right here. If I add something to this side of the equation, I have to add the exact same thing to the other side of the equation. All right, so now that we've completed the square, the next thing that we need to do is this. All she did is she went from this to this. She just added the 100, the 9, and the -105, and she came up with 4. Just combining like terms. Okay, next step. We want to now find the center and the radius of this circle. But in order to do that, remember our the equation for our circle has to look like this. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to r squared. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. This is just the Pythagorean theorem in disguise. So how do I get this to look like this? Well, remember, every single time after we wrote we completed the square, we rewrote our trinomial so that it was a binomial squared. And we can take this one and we can rewrite it as a number squared. So let's look at the pink ones first. Let's look at the x's. In order to get this number here, we have to take this number and we have to divide it by 2. So -6 divided by 2, -3. So this one is going to turn into x minus 3 squared. For this one, we're going to take the -20. We're going to divide it by 2. So we get y minus 10 squared. And then 4, we can think of it as, what number do I multiply times itself to get 4? Well, that's obviously 2, so 2 squared. So remember, these pieces right here give us the center and the radius. But with these two, we have to switch the sign. So the center for our circle is going to be 3, 10, because this is a -3 changes to a +3, -10 changes to a +10. And the radius is just this number here. It's just 2. So last thing that we want to do is we want to take that center and the radius and we're going to graph that circle. Okay? So our center, and this graph is not a very good one, I apologize. Our center is 3, 10. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put our center down at 3, 10. And then we know that the radius is 2. So we are going to go each direction 2 spaces. So we're going to go 2 to the right, we're going to go 2 to the left, we're going to go 2 down, we're going to go 2 up. And I just kind of have to eyeball this one. Now, this kind of looks like it might be a square or a rectangle or a rhombus, but don't draw your circle with corners, right? A circle is perfectly round, so do the best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect like mine is, but, okay? That's how we draw the graph of a circle. Okay, we got the center and the radius from the previous page. Plot the center first. The radius, you go that direction, or that number of spaces in each direction. Make your circle. Okay, so we're going to skip a little bit of this. The one that I do want to talk about is this one. Why did we want to write this like this? It's much easier to figure out what the center and the radius are if it's in this form versus that first form that we started with Elena. Okay, so if we have it in this form, then we can figure out our center and our radius easily, which is how we graph. Okay, so we're just going to kind of look here. We're going to do this one together, and then I'm going to let you guys try another one on your own. So here's how we're going to start. I'm going to cover this up. Our goal is to find the center and the radius of this circle. So that's what we're gonna do first. But in order to do that, we have to go through all those steps first, okay? So first thing we wanna do is we wanna move this 4 over to the other side. So all I'm doing here is moving the constant to the other side, okay? So I still have x squared plus y squared minus 2x plus 4y is equal to 4. So that's all we did. We just took that 4, we moved it over to the other side. I don't want it on this side, I want it over here. So I cancel it out over here and I do the same. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So the second thing we're gonna do is we're gonna rearrange this so that the x's and the y's are next to each other. We're gonna group them by x's and y's. So I'm gonna put the x's right next to each other. So I have x squared minus 2x, and then I'm gonna put the y's together. Okay, so I have y squared and plus 4y. So plus y squared plus 4y, and then that's equal to 4. Okay, so we're just rearranging. So x's and y's are grouped together. So far this hasn't really been anything very tricky. It's a lot of just algebraic manipulation. Okay, now, here's the part where we start to see a few little things pop up. So the first thing we want to do now is we need to get the orange part and the pink part so that we can write those as binomial squared. So I'm going to take this, x squared minus 2x, and we are going to turn that into a squared binomial by putting something at the end. And we're going to do the same thing with this one. So this part right here is just like what we did in the beginning. We had to figure out what number goes here. We're going to do that again. We're going to do it once for the x's. We're going to do it once for the y's. So plus y squared plus 4y plus something is equal to 4. Now, remember what we talked about earlier. The big rule with equations is that whatever you do to one side, you have to do the exact same thing to the other. So whatever I add here, I also have to add over here. And whatever I add here, I also have to add here. Okay? So all I'm doing in this step is I'm just making space to complete the square. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to fill in these blanks here. Okay? So in order to get this number right here, all we're going to do is we're going to take this number, we're going to cut it in half, which is -1, and then we're going to take this number and we're going to square it. And that's what's going to go in this blank. So we have x squared minus 2x plus, remember, anytime that we square a number, positive or negative, we're going to end up with a positive number. So this is going to be +1 because that's what 1 squared is. For the y's, we have y squared plus 4y plus something. So the way we get that something is we're going to divide +4 by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. We're going to square that number, and that's what's going to go here. So this is +4. Now remember, whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do the same thing to the other side of the equation. So if I add 1 on this side of the equation, I also have to add 1 on this side of the equation. And if I add a 4 on this side of the equation, I also have to add a 4 on this side of the equation. So the next step is just combining our like terms. Okay, we still have the x squared minus 2x plus 1 plus y squared plus 4y plus 4. But now instead of this whole big thing over here, we're just going to add all these together. So 4 plus 1 is 5, 5 plus 4 is 9. So over here, all we're doing is just combining our like terms. And all we did in this step was complete the square. Okay, so 2 steps left, and both of these steps are fairly straightforward. So in the first one, we want to take this and we want to write it as a squared binomial. So remember, we're just going to take this number right here, we're going to divide it by 2, and that's what's going to go back here. Same thing for the pink one, right? We want to write this as a binomial squared, take this number, divide it by 2, that's our binomial squared. And the last thing we want to do is we want to write this as a number squared. So what number do I need to square to get 9? Well, that would be 3, so 3 squared. So here's where we get our center and our radius. These 2 right here, remember we have to change the sign, that will give us our center. This number right here, just this part, not the squared, is what our radius is. So our center is +1, because remember we have to change the sign, and -2, because remember we have to change the sign, and our radius is 3. All right, so the next thing that I want you guys to do is I just want you guys to try one on your own. So try one on your own, try this one right here, and then pause it and then check back to see whether or not your answer is correct. All right, so the center should be -6, -1, and the radius should be 5. Now I've written this as 25, but you can also write that as 5 squared. So this would be the equation of our circle. From that we can get our center, change the sign, and our radius, just the number.